Hello everyone, welcome back to another episode of r/slash Tales from Tech Support. In today's episode, the wheels on the crank go round and round, round and... Before we get started, make sure to subscribe so you will never miss a video. So let's get started. The wheels on the crank go round and round, round and... Trigger warning, genuinely. Parts of this take a somewhat darker tone than my other writings. In fact, it seems to be a theme for this episode. As far as I'm aware, no harm actually happened to anybody in the time I was there, but that doesn't mean that was necessarily the intention of all the parties in the story. Not everybody out there is nice, and I'm not just referring to me being rude about dollar users here. But there is some levity too. Preface. Once I'd settled in a XYZ Incorporated, I found that one of my duties was to look after the IP star. I recommended which of our inventions might be worth the pain and expense of patenting, checked the industry for violations of anything we'd already patented, and went through any new PQR Holdings patents with a fine-tooth comb to see if A, it could / should be objected to, or B, there was anything to be learnt and applied in another way. *IP equals intellectual property, nothing to do with addressing stuff here. As keeper of the IP, I also acted as first line of defense against ideas submitted to the company by third parties. Even the ones that might actually work. Being on N***ter patrol was a 24/7 exercise, you never knew when you'd get the call to action. Crank the first. The phone rang. I picked it up and announced myself. "Oh hello, this is Mr. Parkinson, I'm ringing to find out why I haven't heard back from you." I explained that regrettably Mr. Parkinson had the advantage over me, and so I hadn't the faintest *kin idea what he was on about. "I sent you details of my invention last week, I was expecting to have signed a contract by now." Again, Mr. Parkinson held the advantage. I had received an unannounced and completely ridiculous technical submission the previous week, but didn't remember Parkinson being associated with it. I had politely declined on my employer's behalf, and then filed the whole lot just out of reach. I indicated the gist of this to Mr. Parkinson and put the phone down while I retrieved the relevant file. Once I had it open, I was once again able to feast my eyes on the innovations offered by CleverMe Incorporated, none of which could actually be made, and none of which would have worked if they could. The name on CleverMe's paperwork was Mr. Smith, and that's who I had written back to with my refusal. "I'm sorry Mr. Parkinson, these appear to be someone else's work, I don't see your name anywhere. Perhaps yours is still in the post somewhere." "Certainly not, I know you must have it. Tell me about the one you've got in front of you." "No. It doesn't have your name on it, and I've got a duty of confidentiality to the inventor, even if we don't decide to pick up their ideas. I just need to check if it's mine." "It doesn't have your name on it, Mr. Parkinson." And so it continued for a while, with me declining to give out details of the paperwork to some random nutter who'd rung me. Eventually Mr. Parkinson determined that the only way around the impasse was to describe his idea in all of its somewhat limited detail. That, along with mention of CleverMe Incorporated, ultimately persuaded me that I was in fact holding his paperwork. 100% match on the unworkable CR*P. Who'd have guessed? I queried the fact that he'd announced himself today as Parkinson, and that didn't match the technical portfolio previously sent in, and which I'd replied to. "Oh, I sometimes use the name Smith for anonymity purposes." "I see. I didn't, but I sure as H*LL wasn't going to admit it, that was a rabbit hole I had no intention of going down." "Well, it certainly seems to have worked. Anyway, I assessed your drawings and wrote back to you declining your offer on date last week." "Oh, I think I got that, I wasn't interested in a rejection by some flunky engineer. Now I can just sort it out with you." "That was me who wrote to you. I'm the chief development flunky." "Why didn't you pass it up to the board of directors?" "Because they passed it to me for assessment. That's part of my job. And I assess that nothing you've proposed can actually be made on our machines." "Nonsense. You'd hardly need to modify anything at all. And even if you did have to change the machines, it'd easily be worth it. I've been talking to highly unlikely big name brand, and we're already talking about asterisk 30-fold increase in technical spec. Asterisk. It should be noted that while they are sometimes used interchangeably, talking about is not in fact a synonym for have developed and shown to actually work. I see. How are you achieving that? Oh, it's easy, you just need to make it out of the same stuff you use in your machines now. We don't use stuff, it wouldn't work if we did, we use. Well, I'm sure it'll work perfectly fine with whatever products are made out of. I'm still not sure I see. If you're going to make this much improved end product out of whatever our existing product is made from, which will now be 30 times better. More than an order of magnitude. When you're using exactly the same material, and when you don't actually seem to know what that is? Well, I can certainly tell you that previously mentioned highly unlikely customer were very excited when I talked to them about it, so we should certainly have huge improvement as a major target in our project. I can imagine. I'm going to stand by my previous decision. Thank you for your interest in XYZ Incorporated, Mr. Parkinson, but I won't be recommending that we take your proposal any further. I really would like to make a personal presentation to someone technical. You have, Mr. Parkinson. This was it. XYZ Incorporated does not wish to buy any of your ideas off you. Well, that's most disappointing. I have several other pictures I'd like to show you. I'm going to be a particular highway service area on Friday night, about 11:30 or 12. Perhaps you could meet me there, and I'll explain things better face to face. No, Mr. Parkinson, I don't think that'll be necessary. Anyway, that's way outside normal hours, and I have a policy of not meeting people at highway service areas unless I already know them. And never at midnight, star. Asterisk. I did in fact once meet my younger sibling at a specified service area, at midnight, but they were somewhat late and words were duly had about this. At the time I didn't feel it necessary to disclose this to Mr. Parkinson. Well, surely you have a marketing department. One of the marketing girls can meet me, and I'll show the pictures to her. FX. I agreed with Mr. Parkinson that we did have a marketing department, and that some of the people who worked there were indeed ladies. I, however, declined to give out names, or make any meeting arrangements on their behalf. I indicated again, that with the best will in the world, XYZ Incorporated did not wish to work with CleverMe Incorporated, and that nothing was going to change that. Eventually the phone call ended, and it was quiet again. I put the file back, and sent a brief email copied to everyone in marketing and sales advising them that I declined an assignation with CleverMe Incorporated on their behalf, and precisely why. Sometime later in the week I had a meeting with marketing assistant to spend an hour or so going over something or other. I can't remember what, I had something like that reasonably often in the normal course of things. In most of these tales, I've gone to some effort to remove identifying data, including the S*X of the dramatis personae. But in this case, it's actually vaguely relevant to the tale, so I shall have to tell you. Marketing assistant was female, petite, and very pretty. She also had the single dirtiest sense of humor of anyone I've ever met, and a laugh that was well matched to it. After we'd talked about whatever it was the meeting was about, and were into the shooting the breeze part of the agenda, marketing assistant pulled out a copy of my recent email regarding CleverMe Incorporated. And asked why I'd burden them with this particular knowledge, when an asterisk Terpatrol normally operated in isolation unless she was forwarding me stuff for consideration. So I drew breath and explained the nitty-gritty of the situation so far regarding CleverMe Incorporated and Mr. Parkinson to marketing assistant, including the specifics of the desired midnight meetup that I had so hastily declined on her and her colleagues' behalf. That being the main purpose of the email in case CleverMe Incorporated rang marketing direct. By a curious coincidence I had $N***ter file volume 3 with me, and was able to show her the drawings and paperwork supplied by CleverMe Incorporated. We perused the presentation. I thought you said his name was Parkinson? It was when he rang. Apparently, he sometimes uses Smith in written materials. Oh, I see. Between you and me, I don't think she did. You'll recall I certainly King didn't. And if the company were foolish enough to send one of these marketing girls to meet him at midnight in a car park in the middle of nowhere, should the girl ask for Parkinson or Smith? Didn't say. Strangely, that was also something I didn't ask. Assuming you can guess who you're supposed to be meeting, how far is particular highway service area, anyway? Asked marketing assistant, with a faint smirk. About an hour and half each way. You might do it in an hour and quarter that time o' night. Not in my car. This was likely accurate. Marketing assistant was a part-time employee who lived very locally to XYZ Incorporated. She had plenty of other things to spend money on, and so had adopted a low-cost vehicle buying policy quite similar to one I also had for some of my time there. Some of the snobbier senior staff, by a strange coincidence, not one of whom had to actually buy their own transport, they all had company cars, referred to it as car recycling. Which, to be fair, wasn't entirely inaccurate. I was the last owner of more than one vehicle. That might be true. Marketing assistant cocked her head to one side. Nah. We go to bed early on a Friday night, my so works Saturday mornings, so I'll be all sweaty by 10 p.m. anyway. No sense getting dressed again just to go and meet some creep. Thank you for sharing, marketing assistant. But I think you might just be right. That's why I took the liberty of refusing the meeting on your behalf. Do you want Clever Me Incorporated's number, so you can decline the invitation again personally, or shall I just mention our conversation in passing if he bothers me again? You can tell him. But if you know when it's going to be, tell me in advance, so I can come over to your office and listen in. Snigger. You think I can somehow schedule the phone calls I get from these in *ters? More sniggering. We'd done with the actual work by then, so I gathered up my various belongings and made like a tree star. As I reached the door, marketing assistant spoke again. Oh joy, she said. Yes, says I, turning round. Can your estate still claim back mileage allowance if you get murdered or go missing while on company business? I don't think so. I'd stay home if I were you. I will. You take care too. Leaf. It was quiet for the rest of the week, but while I was out and about on Monday, one of the secretaries took a message from someone called Smith, who was disappointed not to have met one of our employees at unspecified location the previous Friday night. This of course got escalated. Having explained to my boss that no, of course I hadn't made any such arrangement, and by the way, was what they were trying to sell us before I was asked to send a girl to a car park at midnight, I didn't ring back. I did receive a couple more phone calls over the next few months, before I ultimately persuaded Mr. Parkinson/Smith that further contact might be unwise and would definitely be futile. Crank the second. The phone rang, the tone it used for internal calls. I picked it up and announced myself. It was someone from marketing. Oh good, oh joy, I'm glad you're in. Can you come to a meeting in the boardroom now, please? Huh. What about? Why am I only being told now? How long for? Probably all day, sorry in advance. What do I need? Nothing. Pen, paper maybe. You can borrow my laptop if there's anything worth using it for. You're coming now, yeah? I was, it seemed. So I pulled on my jacket, grabbed a pad of paper, and set off at a brisk trot between buildings. It was probably gray and raining. Now we're all told, probably with a certain amount of good reason, not to make snap judgments. But first impressions do count, and sometimes there's a reason for them too. And in honesty, I'm usually pretty good at reading people when I meet in person. I disliked Crank2 from the instant I met them, and was quite certain of it even before they'd slimed my hand. Crank2 was a politically connected university professor. They spent their days doing badly designed and utterly meaningless research on how our industry's products affected disabled end users. This involved spending huge sums constructing machines that in no way simulated either the disability or the use of product. Garbage in, garbage out. But as long as the right people are made to look like money-grubbing villains, who cares? Crank2's political sponsors were ruling party at this particular point in time, so their services were being foisted on the industry, who were also expected to foot the substantial bill they generated for wasting everyone's time. So I sat through a couple of hours of disjointed presentation. Along with the others present, I pointed out why the machines were useless, that product wasn't intended to be used that way, and that the end result was drivel. Crank2 poo-pooed this and pointed out how impressed their political sponsors were. It might just have been my jaundiced eye, but each one of these $50,000 costing rigs looked distinctly like it had been thrown together from scrap in a garage over the weekend. Come lunchtime, and a hastily arranged buffet courtesy of the marketing department. I cornered someone from marketing, looking for explanations. And to be honest, some sort of hall pass for the afternoon, so I could go back to doing something useful, and not be late home again. This sh*T was all so bad that they had no problem shooting it down on their own, engineering support not needed. Someone from marketing explained. Crank2 had simply turned up in reception mid-morning, announcing that they were going to make a presentation to all the marketing and sales personnel. Today. Now. Reception was nonplussed, because they weren't expecting this. We used this thing called a diary, and Crank2 wasn't in it. Also, most people who seemed likely attendees were out, doing customer things. You know, their jobs. So the receptionist rang someone from marketing. Fortunately, someone from marketing did know all about Crank2, and the backstory, and the connection to ruling party. So they quickly determined XYZ Incorporated were going to be stuck with a wasted day for several senior staff. If we didn't drop everything and entertain Crank2, then their political sponsors would make sure we suffered for it far worse down the road. Grin and bear it. Splendid, says I, but what do you need me for? You and X person and Y person are obviously perfectly capable of shooting down this BS on your own. So someone from marketing explained more and nastier details. I might have mentioned that I immediately disliked Crank2. Even before I saw their work, they gave off strong vibes of being both a crook and a quack. And a creep. Someone from marketing confirmed the last for me. There was history, not that they knew, or at least related, the details. It turns out that, unbeknownst to me, XYZ Incorporated had AF*King company policy to the effect that no female employee was to be left in a room alone with Crank2 at any time. For any length of time. No exceptions. And yes, Crank2's political cover was that good. I looked over at Crank2 with a renewed revulsion. Needless to say, on this particular day, all the denizens of both sales and marketing who happened to be present were also female. The afternoon was much the same sh*T show, and finally trailed off into nothingness. Then Crank2 announced that they had a flight to catch and had made no arrangements to get themselves back to the airport from XYZ Incorporated. Someone rings down to reception and asks them to book a taxi. The receptionist rings back, they can't get one fast enough. Lady sales rep, who was a newer hire than me, and also therefore had to be brought up to date on the history/policies at lunchtime, and I exchanged glances. Lady sales rep wound up driving Crank2 to the airport in her company car while I rode shotgun. Then she got to drive back through rush hour traffic to drop me off again. I have actually met worse people than Crank2, but not as well connected, and I don't think I've ever been more thoroughly disgusted either. I had to deal with Crank2 a couple more times over the ensuing years, but I was, I suppose, at least forewarned. Before anyone asks, ruling party were still in power when I left XYZ Incorporated, so I honestly can't tell you whether Crank2 ever had their political cover withdrawn. The everlasting Crank. Crank number 3 was a perennial. By the time I took over N*Terpatrol, they had already accumulated a file 2 inches thick. They too had history. In the time before I worked there, IP was looked after by embittered specialist. Way back in the before, when even new boss, remember them, was a new hire. The new boss had been mailed a series of exciting concepts by an independent designer/inventor. Embittered Specialist had been dispatched on new boss's orders to meet with the inventor and explore these concepts. The inventor was Everlasting Crank. Embittered Specialist had traveled a considerable distance and then been taken to tea in a department store cafe where their host had flirted continuously and unsuccessfully with the waitstaff. Embittered Specialist had been unimpressed by the crayon drawings proffered. Embittered Specialist was then annoyed, but unsurprised, to find they were paying the bill. Embittered Specialist returned to the office somewhat and permanently disappointed in new boss. Embittered Specialist also harbored a minor concern that the waitstaff at department store cafe hadn't been appraised of the fact that it was a business meeting and might therefore think Embittered Specialist was somehow related to Everlasting Crack. When I started, Embittered Specialist was close to retirement, so I got N*ter patrol duties fairly early on. "Here's the files," said Embittered Specialist. "You'll note Everlasting Crank has one all of their own. No one specific tale here, just a recurrent modus operandi. I got mailings/faxes from Everlasting Crank every few months. These would typically run to between 40 and 60 pages, mainly comprising material they'd previously sent, but with revised order and page numbering. Always included was a staggeringly onerous, and legally dubious, confidentiality agreement, which had occasionally been pre-signed by Everlasting Crank on our behalf. With this was the now inevitable money order for 1 penny, of which XYZ Incorporated had a startlingly large collection for a billion-dollar multinational. We were supposed to cash this as part of our acceptance of the confidentiality agreement. We didn't. Everlasting Crank was much perturbed by this. In addition to direct mailings, we also sometimes heard from Everlasting Crank's elected representatives. This happened every couple of years and always followed the same narrative. Elected representative would write us a starchy and somewhat unpleasant letter on posh-looking headed paper and accuse us of ripping off their constituent and costing said constituency jobs and investment. What were we going to do about it? Nothing. Except waste yet more time explaining to elected representative that no, we hadn't agreed a multi-billion investment with Everlasting Crank, and no, nothing they'd proposed would work, and no, they didn't have all those patents. And then proving it, lest there be any doubt. One of the other things Everlasting Crank did was mail me bunches of their rejection letters. I don't know why, and it did seem that Everlasting Crank thought their own confidentiality agreement didn't apply to them, despite having been the only person who actually signed it, but I read the letters through and filed them away. My opposite number at PQR Holdings had quite the turn of phrase when writing back. I imagine they also got copies of mine, so I hope those likewise provided them with lunchtime joy. The trouble is, Everlasting Crank appeared to regard all these communications as positive. Actually, there is a story, just a short one. One day, I get a manila envelope from Everlasting Crank in the mail. A surprisingly thin one on this occasion. Everlasting Crank had determined that their ideas might have a military application, and therefore submitted them to British Admiralty. Those folks in charge of the Royal Navy, you know the ones. Everlasting Crank was having difficulty with the reply, and wanted XYZ Incorporated to interpret it and intercede with the military brass on their behalf. Now, I'm sure everyone reading this has received a rejection letter or two. You might well have written some. They vary through genuine and almost helpful, several kinds of generic to sarcastic and/or passive-aggressive. But they've got nothing on the Admiralty. Nothing. The letter ran, approximately, as follows. Dear Everlasting Crank, I confirm receipt of your letter of the date 1B, 4C, 17A, yours sincerely, Light. Commander Smith, Staff Officer to Admiral Jones. To decrypt this, you will be needing the codebook. Fortunately, the Admiralty have thought of this, and printed it in 4-point text on the back of letter. It runs to several thousand words. Equally fortunately, Everlasting Crank's voluminous photocopying operation has handily included a copy of the reverse side. It's all in numerical order, you just have to run down. Basically ladder logic pseudocode for letter writing. Okay, brace yourselves, here we go. 1. You refer to previous correspondence, and 1b. We don't have any. I therefore have no idea what you are talking about. 4. We have examined your submission, and for C. We don't have the faintest F*king clue why the F*ck you think it might interest us. 17. You 17a. Appear to be some kind of nut, please leave us alone in future. I might have paraphrased that just a little. Confidentiality agreements mean I'm writing this years down the line and don't have a copy in front of me, but you get the idea. I still a minor ambition to reduce my personal correspondence to this level, but so far I've only got to the point putting subject to alteration without notice on Christmas cards. I should probably get them specially printed next year. XYZ Incorporated. Decline to get involved in everlasting cranks communications with the military.